November 25th, 1943. South Pacific, just east of the Gilbert Islands. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Sakamoto pressed his face against the periscope's black-rimmed rubber, eyes narrowed on the dim silhouette slicing across the moonlit waves. A Fletcher-class destroyer. American. The USS Hudson. He almost laughed. "They're fast for tugboats," he muttered to his XO, who smiled faintly. "Too slow to matter, too loud to survive." The destroyer drifted perfectly into the trap. Speed 12 knots, standard escort pattern, predictable, clumsy, 3 tubes locked, the order given. Torpedoes hissed into the water, 6 of them, in staggered lines forming what the Japanese called a kaiten no kumo, a cloud of death. Inside the I-45's silent hull, men counted seconds, whispering bets. Then something strange happened. The American ship turned, hard. Then again, not randomly, like instinct, like it knew. The first wave passed behind the stern. The second broke water too soon, its magnetic trigger flaring against empty sea. By the time the third line reached the kill zone, the Hudson had vanished into smoke and speed. Sakamoto stepped back from the scope, stunned. He hadn't missed. He had never missed. But the destroyer was alive, and worse, it was now turning toward them. He didn't know the name of the sailor who'd touched the wheel without permission. He didn't know that in breaking protocol, that man had just rewritten it. By late 1943, the Pacific was bleeding. Island by island, reef by reef, the Americans were clawing their way west, through Tarawa, through Macon, through fire, to Japan's high command. This was the beginning of a storm. But to the submarine fleet, it was opportunity. Below the waves, the Imperial Navy still believed it held the advantage. American convoys stretched thin, reliant on cumbersome destroyers to protect vulnerable transports. Easy prey, predictable routes, undertrained crews. At least, that's what the manuals said. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Sakamoto had memorized those manuals. A career man, son of a naval engineer, trained in Yokosuka, served off China, and now aboard submarine I-45, a hunter beneath the silence. His men respected him. His instincts were sharp, and his disdain for American destroyers ran deep. "They are like drums," he once told his crew. "They make noise, but hollow inside." The target this week, convoy TF-53.5, a dozen landing craft bound for Butaratari, escorted by 4 destroyers, including one, the USS Hudson, fresh off repairs, its crew barely out of training. Its captain, Lieutenant Commander R.W. Johnson, was by the book. Every maneuver logged, every sonar ping measured. Orders came from above, and nothing was to be done freelance. Below decks, however, not everyone agreed. His signalman first class Charles Collins had seen what happened to ships that followed the manual too closely. He wasn't an officer, not even a helmsman, but he watched patterns, radar sweeps, radio bursts, formation drift. He scribbled notes on cigarette wrappers, sketched movement, arcs on meal trays, and quietly, inside his own head, Collins began building a new way to move. Not by protocol, by instinct. He never said it out loud. That would be insubordination. But when a convoy crewmate asked him what he'd do if torpedoes came in from both sides, Collins only grinned. You turn twice before they even know you're dancing. Above him, steel and order ruled. Below him, silence and shadows waited. And in between, the Pacific held its breath. The moon rose heavy and orange over the Gilbert horizon. Waves shimmered like molten oil, quiet but thick, like the ocean knew something was coming. Aboard I-45, inside the dim red glow of the command room, Lieutenant Commander Sakamoto watched the convoy crawl across his chart. 12 transports, 4 destroyers. Pattern, textbook. Speed, consistent. Intervals, predictable. But something tugged at the edges of his confidence. Each time they recalculated the formation's drift, there was a faint irregularity. Barely a few degrees, but enough to notice. It was as if one of the destroyers wasn't staying in its lane. Sakamoto's XO leaned in. Could be current, he offered. But Sakamoto had hunted too long to dismiss it that easily. They're jittering, he muttered. Like they're feeling for something. Below, in the hull of the USS Hudson, Charles Collins stood near the aft radar display, not touching, just watching. His assigned duty was routine. Log signal flags translate Morse, file logs. But his eyes were on the sweep arcs. Every few minutes, he'd jot a number, then glance at the formation's wake through a porthole slit. He had seen something 3 nights ago, a subtle echo in the water's scatter pattern, like sonar bouncing off something deeper. Maybe a sub, maybe just nerves, but it didn't matter. Something felt off. So, without asking, Collins began whispering ideas to the helmsman during shift change. Next run, shave 2 points tighter. Just a nudge, like threading between kelp. At first, the helmsman ignored him, then curiosity, then results. The Hudson began carving the smallest of asymmetrical waves. Nothing big enough to flag command, but enough to throw off straight-line trajectories. To the untrained eye, they were just sea swell reactions. To Collins, it was the beginning of a web. Back on I-45, Sakamoto watched the ship's trail draw uneven curves through his scope. He leaned back, exhaled. Either that captain's drunk, he muttered, or someone down there is thinking like a wolf. His XO chuckled. But Sakamoto didn't, because he had seen wolves before. And they didn't hunt with orders. They hunted with instinct. Pre-dawn. A thin haze lay across the Pacific, soft and warm, like steam rising from a boiling pot. Inside I-45, the mood was silent, focused, tense. Sakamoto gave the hand signal. No words needed. 6 Type 95 torpedoes, the pride of the Imperial Navy, hissed out of their tubes, slicing into the sea with terrifying grace. Their range, over 10,000 meters. Their warheads, packed with more punch than any Allied shell. Their intent, annihilation. Each was timed, spaced, staggered, like arrows in a myth, cast in arcs meant to kill from every angle. From below, they rose. From behind, they curved. From ahead, they cut off escape. On board the USS Hudson, Collins didn't see the torpedoes, but he felt them. Something in the way, the radar flickered. A sudden silence in the water. The gut-level tension that only comes before death. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He lunged toward the helm, shouting, not requesting. "Starboard, 20! Now! Full!" The helmsman hesitated. The ship's officer turned, barking. "Who gave that—" Collins didn't stop. "Turn her, now!" The wheel spun. The Hudson banked hard right, slicing the water like a fish breaking net. The first torpedo passed clean. No sound, just a shimmer. Then another. Too shallow. Its warhead detonated prematurely, rocking the ship with foam and fury. The captain ran to the deck, saw the wakes splitting around them like river forks. Another torpedo screamed across their bow. No time to brace, but it missed. Collins gritted his teeth. "Port 15! Ride the brake!" No one stopped him now. The ship swung again, violently, catching the end of a swell, surfing it sideways through the spread. Behind them, two more torpedoes collided in confusion, their trails knotting, detonating beneath empty sea. On I-45, Sakamoto blinked at the chaos on sonar. Something was wrong. Not with the weapons, with the target. The Hudson should have been gutted, broken, screaming fire into the sky. Instead, it was still moving, still whole, and now, turning toward them. One sailor whispered, "Sir, I think they saw us." Sakamoto stepped back from the scope. "No," he said slowly. "They didn't see us. They felt us. No strategy could explain it. No doctrine had prepared for this. One man, without orders, had broken the pattern, and in doing so, shattered the hunt. The sun cracked the horizon like a wound. Light spilled across the ocean in slow gold, beautiful, cruel. Aboard I-45, silence reigned. The sonar officer replayed the torpedo patterns, hands trembling slightly. What should have been 6 clean strikes looked like a child's scribble now. Sakamoto hovered above the sonar display, his face pale, his lips pressed thin. No mechanical failure, no drift error. Every firing angle had been perfect. And yet, the Hudson danced through them all, like it had read their minds. "Replay it," Sakamoto whispered. The sonar man hesitated. "Sir, I've done it 5 times. Again!" Beeping filled the cabin. The attack played out once more, their torpedoes launching, arcing, splitting, only to chase a ghost. This wasn't random. It wasn't luck. Sakamoto's XO leaned in. "It wasn't the ship," he said quietly. "No destroyer reacts that fast." Sakamoto didn't look at him. "Then what?" The XO swallowed. "It was someone." A beat passed. A long, sickening beat. Sakamoto straightened. The realization struck like cold water. Not a system. Not a radar upgrade. Not a command protocol. A man. One man aboard that ship. Had read the ocean, felt the danger, and bent steel to instinct. A sailor, a technician, maybe, who disobeyed, broke the chain, took the wheel without waiting for a signal, and saved a destroyer from death. In silence, Sakamoto sat down. He had hunted ships for 9 years. He had studied their designs, their blind spots, their response times. But this wasn't something he could outwit. You couldn't chart instinct. You couldn't predict disobedience. And you couldn't fight an enemy who encouraged it. The Hudson pulled into Funafuti 3 days later, scarred but alive. Sailors lined the deck in silence. Some stared at the water, still hearing the hiss of death beneath the waves. Captain R.W. Johnson stood inside the wardroom, jaw locked, eye red from sleeplessness. Across from him sat Charles Collins, signalman, not helmsman, not officer, just a man with instincts. Johnson laid the after-action report on the table without opening it. "I've read the logs," he said quietly. "According to this, you issued helm commands without clearance." Collins nodded. He didn't apologize. The room was silent. "You do know," Johnson continued, "that's a court-martial offense." Another nod. "And you do know you saved every soul on this ship." That time, Collins didn't answer. Johnson leaned forward. "What made you do it?" Collins blinked, looked down, then up. "I saw their pattern. The arcs. Too clean. Too confident. I'd seen it once before, off Noumea." Johnson studied him, not with anger now, but something like respect and fear. "You're not trained in sonar." "No, sir." "You're not cleared to command maneuvers." "No, sir." Johnson stood, then slowly offered his hand. Collins hesitated, took it. Later that night, in a sealed memo to Pacific Command, Johnson wrote, "Signalman First Class Charles Collins deviated from protocol. He acted on gut, not orders. And because of that, we're all still breathing. I recommend no disciplinary action. I recommend promotion." Word traveled fast. Within a week, Japanese intelligence intercepted the memo. Sakamoto read it on carbon paper, pulled from a captured scout plane. He read it twice. A sailor broke protocol and got promoted? He looked at the faces of his own men, rigid, rule-bound, afraid to speak without permission. And something inside him cracked. "They reward disobedience," he muttered. The XO looked up. "Sir?" Sakamoto folded the paper. "No," he said slowly. "They reward thinking." It wasn't just tactics. It was a different kind of war. Tokyo Bay, January 1944. The meeting room inside Naval Headquarters was dense with cigarette smoke and quiet rage. Fleet Admiral Osami Nagano stared at a wall-sized map of the Pacific. Pins, threads, flags, and an ugly new truth. In the last 30 days, 4 destroyers had dodged torpedo attacks. Not all had survived, but more than should have. Not by speed, not by numbers, but by something Japan had never prepared for. Adaptation. Rear Admiral Kurita broke the silence. "Sir, we believe the Americans are deploying a new sonar." Another captain disagreed. "No, the angles are too fast. It's not technology. It's the helmsman." Nagano's voice sliced the room. "Impossible. No helmsman reacts without command, not in formation, not under fire." Silence. Then a younger officer stood, Commander Hisashi, barely 30. He held a piece of intercepted communique, the memo about Collins. He read it aloud, every word, especially the last line. "I recommend promotion." Whispers filled the room. Kurita scoffed. Rewarding disobedience? That's not command. That's chaos. But Hisashi's hands trembled as he lowered the paper. Or its evolution. He turned to the map. We have trained our men to wait, to follow, to memorize. But he tapped the Pacific, near Tarawa. They trained theirs to improvise. Sakamoto sat in the back row, silent, unnoticed. But inside his chest, a tremor. He remembered the way the Hudson had moved, not like a machine, like a creature. Aware, flexible, unbound. Nagano finally spoke again. From this point forward, no torpedo attack will be assumed successful until confirmed by debris or fire. He turned to Sakamoto. You failed to sink your target. Sakamoto stood, bowed. Yes, sir. Nagano stared. Why? A long pause. Then the truth. Because we planned for ships, sir. Not for mines. The words settled into the floor like lead. For a decade, Japan had built a navy around discipline, hierarchy, and precision. Now, in one twist of the wheel, one unauthorized turn, the Americans had revealed a different model. Not better steel, better thinking. And for the first time, senior Japanese officers began to understand. They weren't just losing territory. They were losing the future. Inside a secure bunker in Yokosuka, naval intelligence officers gathered around a wooden table stained with sweat and ink. On it sat a stack of captured American manuals, training guides, tactical memos like the one that promoted Collins. What they found wasn't just strange, it was unthinkable. One memo, marked Pacific Fleet Operational Adjustment, Reverm 4, outlined in new destroyer tactics. Helmsmen are authorized to deviate from formation if sonar threat is confirmed visually or instinctually. Not requested, authorized, without waiting for orders. Another document, a destroyer captain's field journal, described a program called Adaptive Maneuvering Training. Crews drilled not just in following orders, but in breaking them when survival demanded it. American warships were being redesigned, not just with better radar, but with command chains flexible enough to bend under pressure and not break. They even trained deck teams to operate as modular units. Each sailor knew the basics of 3 roles. Engineers could man guns. Gunners could read sonar. Signalmen could take the helm, just like Collins did. In contrast, Japanese destroyers ran on strict specialization. If one officer died, that role died with him. If orders failed to transmit, ships froze. Naval command had long believed discipline was the highest virtue. But these manuals suggested a deeper truth. The Americans were not abandoning discipline. They were evolving it. Sakamoto read the documents in stunned silence. Every page chipped away at what he had once believed was superior. We taught our men to obey, he whispered. They taught theirs to decide. In the margins of one field memo, an American officer had written in pen, "Let them write doctrine. We'll write results." February 1944. The Central Pacific swelled with steel. American destroyers, dozens at a time, sliced across the ocean in patterns no Japanese chart could predict. They weren't moving in columns anymore. They were scattering, reconverging, spiraling. To Japanese sonar teams, it looked like madness. To the men aboard the Hudson, it felt like freedom. Each ship had begun operating with what the U.S. Navy now called autonomous nodes. They shared intelligence, radar contacts, sonar pulses, wind drift, via encrypted radio. But no ship waited for central command. If one destroyer saw a threat, it signaled, not for permission, but for coordination. Collins, now promoted to acting helm supervisor, trained 24 other sailors in his method. The Navy called it collaborative intuition. Collins called it not dying. Japanese observers watching from distant islands couldn't make sense of it. One admiral in Truk Lagoon watched a destroyer break formation, turn sharply into open sea, and, minutes later, pick off a submarine stalking the rear. "No signal," he whispered. His aide shook his head. "No delay." On I-45, Sakamoto received new orders. Stay hidden, conserve torpedoes, wait for a structured target. But structure was gone. American convoys now moved like swarms, unpredictable, fast, and viciously self-correcting. Even their failures seemed rehearsed. In a debriefing, one Japanese sonar officer muttered, "They move like they want to be attacked, just to test the system." By March, American destroyers had names like the Ghosts, the Weavers, the Snakes. Not official. Just the nicknames whispered by those who survived their passes. Sakamoto, reading report after report, circled one line with red pencil. It came from an intercepted transmission between two destroyers off Mauro. No time to wait. Act like wolves. Wolves! The word echoed. They had not built a navy. They had unleashed a pack. March 1944. Beneath the concrete dome of Japan's Naval Production Bureau, the numbers arrived like funeral bells. In the last 6 months, the United States had commissioned over 80 new destroyers. By year's end, that number would triple. Factories in Pittsburgh, Mobile, and San Francisco were churning out hulls faster than Japan could lay keels. And it wasn't just speed, it was precision at scale. Each Fletcher-class destroyer came pre-packed with standardized parts. Modular turrets, identical engine units, swappable electronics, a broken radio in one ship, replaced in hours. A busted rudder on another, same template, slide it in, bolt it down. The Japanese Navy, still proud of its handcrafted vessels, couldn't keep pace. Every destroyer in their fleet had its own quirks, its own parts, its own failures. When one system went down, it stayed down until a specific engineer could fix it. Sakamoto's own sub had been waiting 3 weeks for a single valve. Meanwhile, American ships swapped out entire functions before breakfast. But the real blow came not from the factories. It came from the classrooms. Reports showed that by early 1944, the U.S. Navy had rewritten its destroyer training manuals 7 times. 7. Each rewrite included case studies from real combat. They didn't teach theory. They taught lessons soaked in salt water and fire. And Collins, his name, was now part of the curriculum. Case study, Hudson Maneuver, November 1943. Not just remembered, institutionalized. Even field manuals were now printed with a blank notes section, encouraging sailors to submit revisions. The Doctrine was alive. Japanese officers sat in silence as these reports were read aloud. One admiral finally broke. "They manufacture adaptation," he said flatly. "Faster than we can write doctrine." No one responded. There was nothing to say. This was no longer about bravery, or honor, or steel. This was war, by iteration. By the time Japan reacted, America had already changed again. 23 years later, a quiet morning in San Diego. The breeze carried salt and memory across the Naval Museum pier, where children ran between exhibits and old men stood silently before plaques etched in bronze. Among them, a visitor from Tokyo, gray-haired, stooped, his uniform long since exchanged for civilian linen. Former Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Sakamoto. He walked slowly past the models of American battleships, past engines torn from destroyers, until he stopped before a rusted helm mounted in glass. The plaque beneath it read, "From USS Hudson, helm operated during evasive action, November 25, 1943. Signalman First Class Charles Collins, acting without orders, saved 327 men from certain destruction." Sakamoto stared at it for a long time. The wheel was simple, worn, unremarkable, but in his memory, it still spun, violently, defiantly, slicing through the sea like a blade through fate. A tour guide approached. "Ever serve on one of these?" he asked. Sakamoto didn't answer at first. Then a nod. "Yes," he said softly. "I hunted them." The guide smiled, not quite understanding. Sakamoto reached out, not touching the glass, just hovering his hand near it. And in that moment, the silence of the Pacific returned. The torpedoes. The radar. The moment everything he'd believed fell apart, because he had once trusted a system that punished deviation. And Collins, just a signalman, had been allowed to think, to disobey, to save. Sakamoto turned to leave, but not before whispering, almost to himself, "They gave power to the man." He paused. "We chained ours to the system." The museum faded behind him, but the wheel stayed, spinning in memory. And somewhere, across the sea, another destroyer cut a sharper arc, because one sailor once turned without permission and changed the course of war.